Hi there, I'm Bass Fox. Welcome to today's video, which is going to be all about EQ. And we're going to talk about all the kinds of EQs that we bass players use. And for a lot of that, we're going to use the Darkglass Anagram to illustrate these concepts. Just because it's practical to use it, it has representations of most kinds of amplifier EQs, pedal EQs, and even front of house and digital audio workstation type EQs. But we're going to start with something very simple, just the EQ you have on your bass itself, right? So pretty much everybody has at least some kind of EQ on their instrument. I do have one out of my over 20 basses doesn't have any EQ at all. That's the Joel Dart 3. All it has is a volume pot. Everything else, even the passive basses, have a tone knob, and a tone knob is a simple kind of EQ. What it is, it's a low pass filter. It's a simple passive filter that cuts out the high end so that your bass sounds darker, right? And you can get it to sound super dark, or you can bring it all the way up and let it be as bright as the pickups allow it to be without any kind of artificial boost or anything like that. However, some active basses like this one have actual EQ circuitry built in to the preamp that they come with. So this is an Ibanez EHB 1505S. It's the short scale version of their ergonomic headless basses. And I'm gonna put everything flat here, but right on board it has volume, it has pickup selector, which I like to leave on just the neck pickup, so it sounds a little bit like a P-bass that way. It has a passive active switch, so right now we're going to leave it active because that's when you engage the EQ, right? If you leave it passive, this middle knob in the bottom concentric configuration here acts as a passive tone control. So right there you can already see how it opens up the sound, makes it darker or brighter, right? If I engage the active circuitry, then we have way more capabilities as far as EQing right on the bass itself, on this bass. And if you have a Stingray, that was one of the first bass guitars to actually have onboard EQ. I think some of the preamps have just bass and treble cut and boost. Some models, like the one I have bass, mid, and treble cut and boost. This one has something very interesting, which is not only does it have bass boost right here, already we can hear how this sounds way bassier. Right? So if I leave it flat, this is what it sounds like. Right? So yeah, definitely nice to boost that bass. Right? And you might want to cut the highs too if you want an even darker sound. So bass and treble are in the concentric knobs at the bottom here. Now the other concentric configuration is the mids, and what you have is in the middle you have cut and boost. So I can boost it if I turn it up. Hear how much more mid-range you get there? And I can cut it. So now it sounds super scooped. Pretty much only highs and mids, only highs and lows, right? If I bring it back to flat, we have a more natural sound, although we did cut the highs and boost the lows. Now, what's that last knob here, the outer part of the concentric knob here? Well, that's the frequency selection, right? So if I boost, now I can sweep the frequency to choose. And hear how that sounds like a wah-wah, right? Because this is basically a band pass semi-parametric mid EQ. Why is it semi-parametric? Well, because it has one more parameter other than just the gain, right? Which is the frequency. A fully parametric EQ, as we'll see, has an additional parameter that you can alter, which is the band width, and we'll talk about that soon as well. So, what do you use this for? Well, most EQs can be used either creatively or correctively, right? You can use corrective EQ, which is to correct a problem. So if you hear maybe a boomy frequency, you can try to isolate it, find it, and cut it. Or if you're missing a certain kind of frequency, to cut through the mix, to blend better with your band, you can find that and boost it. And how do you find the frequency that you want to alter? Well, you can give it a boost and sweep until you find it. Here's the kind of a honky frequency here. And here we have kind of a boomy one. Once you find it, then you can roll it back. You can bring it back to the middle, which is flat, and then roll it back even further. And then you have a more clear tone without so much boominess, right? Or if you're looking for that more boxy, honky frequency, right, I think I found it right there. So now let's cut it. Bring it back to flat and then roll it back just a tad. And that's kind of that scooped tone. Right, so already we've talked about semi-parametric, parametric, simple EQs, frequency selection, right? So pretty much everything else that we're going to talk about is variations of these same kind of ideas, right? So let's talk about now what's the next thing that comes after your bass. Well, you have it plugged in usually to some kind of preamp or amplifier, right? So over here on the anagram, we can go ahead and choose one such device, right? It has emulations of those. So for example, in amps and cabs, I can choose one of many amplifiers or preamplifiers. So one that I really like is the Gentle, right? Which is a clone or a model of the venerable Noble tube preamplifier that a lot of people love, and I wish I could afford a real one myself, but I'm pretty happy that I have an emulation of it in my anagram. Right, and here, let's make the bass flat again. So I'm gonna put everything back in its middle positions here. All right, so now the EQ isn't affecting the bass sound at all. In fact, if I put it passive, it sounds exactly the same. See, passive or active. Well, it does sound a little darker in passive mode because the treble is in the middle position, right? So that's flat when you're active, but it's actually cutting when you're passive, right? So we're gonna leave it active, but with no EQ at all. And now we can use the Gentle here to bring up some of those lows. And maybe cut some of the highs a little bit. And this one has a low cut. What does the low cut do? This is just a filter. It's a low cut filter or high pass filter. Those are equivalent terms, right? Something that passes highs is the same thing as something that cuts lows, and vice versa. Something that passes lows, so a low pass filter, is the same thing as a high cut filter, right? So maybe you're somewhere that has very loud subwoofers and your sound is too bassy, it's too muddy, it's undefined. So maybe you just want to get rid of all those frequencies below a certain, I don't know exactly what the cutoff is on the Gentle's low cut. It might be around 60 hertz, 75 hertz, right? So you use that if you want to just get rid of that low rumble and have a more focused, defined bass tone, right? So this is a very simple kind of EQ on a very nice sounding but simple preamp in terms of what it offers in terms of controls. Another one that is a little bit more complex is the harmonic booster. harmonic booster, not only does it have an EQ with mid-frequency sweeping, just like the onboard one on my bass. So if I bring up the high mid, the mid here, hear that much more mids now, right? And we can sweep it. Very nice. In fact, I can bind that to my pedal. Hold on, let me make sure it's on other here. This is the M Audio, the cheap pedal that works for the Anagram. If you have it in the other position here. And just so I can play and fiddle with that sweep at the same time, I'm going to bind it to the mid frequency here. So already this sounds like a wah-wah, right? Why? Because that's what a wah-wah is. A wah-wah is a bandpass filter that is controllable by your foot, by a expression pedal or just a potentiometer connected to a pedal. So here we can use the pedal instead of my hands to really find a frequency, either one we don't like and we want to cut, or one we do like and we want to boost. But here's another thing about the harmonic booster. It's got a character parameter here, which I really like. It really does just that. It adds character to the bass sound. So I like to use that first because that also affects the frequency response. Right? And then I can decide if I want to cut or boost any mid frequencies. I can add bass and I can add treble or cut it, right? So for a lot of recordings, a lot of work that you might do maybe in the studio, this is all you would really need. Just a preamp and, you know, just fine tune the response of your bass. You might even only need a direct box and your onboard EQ. That could be enough too. So us bass players, we are lucky in that we don't have to rely too much on effects outside of our own instrument a lot of the time, right? We're not expected to have highly affected tone. However, it's good to know what's out there because there are certain styles of music and genres that do require or allow for or inspire you to pursue a little bit more experimentation in the EQ department, right? So what's another kind, right? So let's mute both of these preamps here, and we're going to bring up an amp now. Now this is a simulation of an actual amplifier head, right? The big power thing that you put on top of a cabinet and makes your bass loud. And we have many of them here, so I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to choose one to use as an example. And the horror bass, for example, is based on a orange amplifier, right? And here we have, again, bass, right? So we can boost the bass. We have a fixed middle, right? So why don't we make a quick loop here just so I don't have to be playing the bass as I do this. So we're just gonna record. There we go. You can turn that up a little bit. Okay, so now we can exit the looper here and play around with the EQ on the Fruity HB50 here. And we can have more bass. We can scoop out some of that middle. We can give it a little bit more gain, for example. Gain just brings up all the frequencies, right? It's not really EQ. And you can bring down the treble here. Right? And if we want to make it sound a little more authentic, we can add a cab to that. Now, the cab isn't actually EQ per se, but it does affect the frequencies you're hearing. So probably part of what goes into a cabinet simulation is some kind of equalization, right? We can choose the cab we want here, maybe this nice 410 or 412 Darkglass thing here. And we can go back to the horror bass and maybe less gain, more bass, right? Cool. So we've gone through the onboard EQ of your bass. We've gone through the EQ on some kind of preamplifier. You might have maybe that Ampeg pedal or the classic Sans amp that so many people have. I have one here too. And now we're looking at amplifier EQs, different amplifiers. Hold on, let me go into the looper here, stop it for a second. Different amplifiers will have more or less complex EQs, right? Some of them might actually have, I remember some Harkeys and Trace Elliott units from the 90s had full-on like many bands of graphic EQ. Now, what's a graphic EQ? Well, let's give ourselves a little bit of a boost here with with just a noble, right? Just to bring up, to start with something a little nicer, and maybe the harmonic booster as well. Just we start with something a little bit fuller than just a flat, you know, plain sound of this bass without using its onboard EQ. And we're going to have a look at the graphic EQs that are available in the Darkglass Anagram. So we go to EQ filters and dynamics section over here, and there are two of them. There are two graphic EQs. So a graphic EQ is called that because it's got a whole bunch of faders. Each fader represents a different band. And when you set those bands, you can see the faders kind of draw out the graphic representation of your EQ curve. So that's why they're called a graphic EQ, right? Because they act as like a low resolution graphical representation of your EQ curve. So we have two here. We have the Darkglass one, which is nice because it has 4 middle bands, and then it has a high shelf and a low shelf. Now, what's shelf? Well, usually most of the bands have this kind of a bell shape, right? Where you choose a frequency, and when you boost it or cut it, you're boosting that frequency and a little bit of the neighboring frequencies as well, depending on the band width, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. These ones have fixed bandwidth and fixed frequencies. You can't choose the frequency on each band, and you can't choose the bandwidth, but you have a bunch of different bands. So that's how you choose the frequency, by which band you're going to alter. So let's play that loop again. Let's turn it down a tiny bit now that we're using the let's bring the treble back up on the, kind of make the harmonic booster flat. We're just going to use it for character, right? All right, and we'll do the same with the noble here. Right, so now we have a flat sound here. We're going to boost a little bit more. And we're going to go back into the Darkglass EQ. So what a shelf is instead of having that bell curve, it's a shelf shape, literally the word, right? So it's going to bring up that selected frequency and every other frequency that's lower than that if it's a low shelf, right? So as I bring up low shelf here, it's not only boosting the frequency that's the selected frequency, it's also boosting all of the lower frequencies below that frequency. So it's like an overall bass or low end boost, right? Or you can cut it too, right? So all of these have low cut or boost. Now you have 1, 2, 3, and 4 mid frequencies to choose from. Low mid, 2 mid-mids, right? A lower and a higher one, a high mid, and then you have a high shelf. Again, the high shelf is the same thing, except that it's the high end. So you're boosting a certain frequency and all the frequencies above it as you use the high shelf, or you can cut it, right? You can make it a little darker sounding. And we have the 3 kilohertz here. See how that gives it a lot more brightness, the 3 kilohertz frequency. right? That's good for maybe you want to cut through the mix when you're slapping, or maybe you want to cut it to make your sound a little darker, right? And the 1.5K is a high mid, right? Rather, let's call the 3K a high frequency, the 1.5 a high mid, so you can make it more scooped if you cut it, or you can make it more defined if you boost it, right? And then you have the 500 hertz, which is like a low mid. It's a little bit more like a boxy sounding, so you can cut that boxiness by attenuating it a little bit, right? Which cutting and attenuating is the same thing. And then you have the low here in 250 hertz, right, which is also kind of muddy territory. So usually you would cut there and then boost the low shelf, right? And that's a nice sound right there, right? So this is all about shaping your sound for whatever kind of music you're playing, what your instrument sounds like, what you sound like, you know, where you're on the instrument you play, the attack you use, if you're using a pick, if you're using your fingers, etc. All of that affects how you would want to set your EQ. Now we have another one, which is the generic one, and by the looks of it, you know, graphically speaking, it looks like the MXR. So I'm not sure if it has the exact same frequencies as a 6-band MXR EQ, but this one doesn't have the shelves, right? It just has 6 frequencies, fixed frequencies. It has 100 hertz there, which is the low, right? But it's not a shelf. So you can just boost or cut 100 hertz there. That's nice to give it a little bit of boost. The 200 hertz, remember, that's going to be kind of like that muddy zone. So we can maybe cut it a couple dBs. 400 hertz is the mid there. You can make a mid scooped by cutting it some. 800 hertz. That's kind of nice. You know, it's nice to have both of these because they do sound very different. And nothing's stopping you from using multiple EQs. Maybe you can approximate the sound you want with this graphic EQ, but then you would use the actual parametric EQ that the Darkglass Anagram has to fine-tune it beyond what's available here, right? And we're boosting now the 3.2 kilohertz, and that's it. It only goes up as high as 3.2 kilohertz. But that's enough usually for bass, right? This is already like brightness territory over here, right? I think we need to change the loop because this is getting boring. So I'm gonna clear it and try to make it like fit a tempo or anything. It's just so we have something to listen to as we're fiddling with these EQs. Right, let's go, let's get out of the looper again. Now we're gonna turn off the 6-band EQ and we're gonna have a look at the high pass and low pass, which are just simple filters. High pass is just something to, again, like you have on the Noble there, just something to cut off low frequencies in general. You can choose the frequency and the slope, right? What's the slope? Slope is how much it'll reduce the frequencies below the selected frequency, right? So a minus 6 dB per octave slope means that at each additional octave below the selected frequency, you'll be attenuating it by 6 dBs, whereas a 12 dB slope is double that, right? So it's a steeper slope. You're cutting more of those lower frequencies below the selected frequency. You also have 18 and 24. 24 is like a synthesizer filter, right? And you can kind of hear that already here. Not completely because it's not a resonant filter, and we'll talk about that as well in a little bit. Okay, so this is a simple utility filter just to cut some lows if you need to when you're on stage or whatnot. And low pass is the same thing, but for the highs. So you can cut Cut those highs and make your sound darker, right? And again, maybe there's lots of tweeters, maybe your bass has new strings, you don't love that bright sound, so you can easily just use a low pass filter or a high cut filter. And again, over here you also have the selector for the slope, which is how, and again, you can, right, how much you're attenuating the frequencies above the selected frequency. And here again, it sounds a little bit like a synth filter, right? Because it's pretty steep slope. Okay, now we're gonna swap this out for the parametric EQ finally. This is the most comprehensive and powerful EQ that you have, even in a professional console or in a studio plugin, a DAW plugin. You'd be hard pressed to find an EQ that's more powerful than this. This has 6 bands, and each band can have boost, cut, frequency selection, and bandwidth. Now we're going to talk about bandwidth. We haven't talked about bandwidth yet. Let me take a break from the loop again. Right? So what's bandwidth? Bandwidth is exactly what the word says, is how wide the band of frequencies that you are affecting is. So you can have it very narrow and be very surgical and find a specific little frequency that you might want to cut, and just cut that and not affect the neighboring frequencies very much, right? But that sounds a little bit unnatural. And then you can have a wider bandwidth where you boost or cut a selected frequency, and then the neighboring frequencies also get affected, less so, but somewhat, right? And that's really visible graphically when you look at the parametric EQ. So you have 3 little buttons here on top. Up and down is boost and cut. So already there is a preset bandwidth and frequency for each of the bands, right? So you have these knobs here, and that might be enough, right? And this will act as a graphic EQ, right? Where you have a low shelf on the bottom here, you have a high shelf on the top, and then the mids are, all right, already this sounds great. Right, you might not need to fiddle with this any further, right? But if you do, you can. So here's the thing. Let's go back to flat. You can just push the encoder to go back to flat, and let's fiddle with this one over here. It's the 4th knob. That's frequency 3, right? Now I'm gonna hit the side-to-side icon here, and that's frequency selector. And again, this is where you can choose the frequency, right? And you can choose it to a certain range because you don't want too much overlap. I mean, if you want to change this frequency, then you would just go to this other knob over here, to this other band, right? So you can fine-tune that. Now, if you want to be super surgical, and you can do the same with this one over here, right? And even the low shelf, right, is where does it start? Where does that shelf begin? You can choose that, right? Now let's come back to the 4th knob over here and choose the 3rd parameter, which is bandwidth, and we can make it, look at that, super narrow, right? Like a needle almost, or super wide, right? So wider is going to sound more natural, right? Narrower is going to be more surgical. So it all depends. So if you have a particular frequency that you want to get rid of, that's annoying you because of the resonance of the venue, or because of the way the amplifier responds, or whatever, or maybe your distortion emphasizes a certain frequency that's annoying and you'd like to cut it, you can do that with this kind of a tool. And again, the way that sound engineers like myself usually find the frequency, it's an old trick, is you boost it and sweep it, and then when it really like rings out at you, you're like, that's the one, then you cut it, right? So let's go back to sweeping. Let's find a frequency that maybe we don't like so much. Right, that I don't really love that frequency right there, so we'll go back to boost and cut, and we can cut it, right? So we got rid of that annoying, like kind of nasal mid there. So that's how you use a parametric EQ, right? Now there's another parametric EQ in the anagram in the form of the global EQ. Now this is important. The global EQ is a tool for adjusting your overall sound to different situations. So therefore it's not saved with the preset. It's a global control. So you have your presets, you like how they sound on your headphones, you like how they sound in your rig at home or in your rehearsal space, but then you go to a venue that's very different. You don't want to mess with your preset because you like that preset. You like how you don't want to mess with it and then have to go back. You don't want to have to save a preset just for the venue. So you go to the global EQ. How do you assess it? Well, you long press the last encoder here, which is your mixer page, right? Where you can determine the volume of your XLR outputs, your quarter-inch outputs, your headphone outputs, and your global output, master output, and you can hit the EQ over here. And this is your global EQ. The global EQ is exactly the same as the parametric EQ. It has all the same controls, has all the same frequencies, except that instead of those icons with the side-to-side, up and down, and brackets, the little arrows, it actually says the words gain, frequency, and width, right? And that's just, I guess, just to set it apart from the one that's built in, from the one that's a block, right? Right? So I can choose frequency here and then sweep that frequency. Find the frequency I don't like, maybe make it a little bit more narrow or wider, right? If I want to just make a smiley face shape there, I can choose a single frequency and just cut that. Right, so that's super nice. That's the global EQ, and it gives you a whole lot of flexibility to adjust your sound for whatever situation you're in, and it's going to affect the output of your anagram regardless of the preset. You change presets and this won't move, right? So let's say tomorrow you're back at the rehearsal space, you want to reset this so because it was set to the venue where you just played. Well, you can hit reset over here and it's gone. It's back to flat and you're back to and now you can adjust it again for whatever situation you're in. But just remember, the global EQ is not going to be saved with your preset. Don't use it as part of your sound for a particular preset because it's not going to get saved. So that's pretty much it. The honorable mentions here, the filters are kind of EQs as well, right? We've already talked about these simple low-pass and high-pass filters that are in preamps and that are simple utility kind of blocks in the anagram. But we also have the envelope filters over here and the wah-wah, right? So we can choose, for example, the wah-wah over here. And we're going to choose swap so that now my foot switch is affecting the wah-wah position, right? And that's just a filter that's being controlled by my foot. The cutoff frequency is what's being controlled, right? And you can see it says position here, but basically that is frequency, cutoff frequency, right? So that's the wah-wah, and you also have the currently two envelope filters, right? So we can bind the expression pedal to the gravitron cutoff frequency there, and that's how I used to do wah-wah before we had a wah-wah block. In fact, I still kind of like it better. Has a little bit more character than that basic wah-wah block. You have sensitivity because envelope means it's gonna follow your amplitude envelope. The envelope is just the shape that is described by the volume that you're outputting from your bass, which depends on how you play, how strong you play, how loud the instrument is, and the decay as well, right? Because once you hit a note, it's going to immediately start lowering in volume as that string starts to lose energy, right? So naturally, the envelope filter will start closing the frequency. as your note gets, as it gets softer, it also gets darker, right? So that's the envelope filter. Gravitron is one, and we have the Moog one, which is based on a Moog pedal called the Mooger Fooger. They have a whole series of these pedals, and this is the filter one. And here we have resonance. And the reason why that kind of like generic low-pass block didn't sound too much like a synth was because it doesn't have resonance. Resonance is also known as emphasis, and what it is, it's also Q. It's called Q. Sometimes it's related to the bandwidth, but usually what it is a feedback. It's also called feedback, right? So when you're feeding the filter back to itself, that selected frequency that you're affecting gets emphasized. So thusly, it's called feedback, resonance, or emphasis, because it's going to emphasize the selected frequency, and it's going to make it much more, the sweeping of the frequency much more noticeable. And if I turn down my bass here, maybe turn up the envelope amount, turn up the envelope mix, give it a little drive. See how it starts bright and starts to get darker. Right? It gives them quack, 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 that quacky sound. So yeah, an envelope filter is also a kind of EQ. It gets an honorable mention because it's not a dedicated EQ tool. But I think that's it. That'll cover all the EQs that you might possibly use in your bass signal chain, from the instrument itself all the way to the mixing platform of your choice, be it live or in the studio. With the examples being illustrated by the Darkglass Anagram. I hope you liked the video. I hope you liked the channel. Please hit like, subscribe, and share, comment below, all of that stuff. And stay tuned for an upcoming video like this one, but on compression. We're gonna have a look at some of my pedal compressors, and we're gonna have a look at all the ones that are in the Darkglass Anagram. And that's going to be really interesting and fun and useful information, because playing the bass is only part of getting an awesome bass sound. Part of it is knowing your tools. You used to just plug in and let the engineer do the job, but more and more we are also somewhat responsible for our own tone, our own sound. It's not only about making it fit and work, it's also part of your personality and your voice as a musician. So it's important to learn these things. Anyway, thanks again. Feel the vibration. See you soon. This has been Bass Fox.